NASCAR just can't catch a break with the weather. Some all-time great racing at Atlanta cut short by rain. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Coming to you from a random hotel room in Mississippi. Last night on the road, I'll be back home tomorrow. I just got done watching the NASCAR Cup Series at Atlanta. The Quaker State 400, I think that was the sponsor tonight. I feel like we used to make a much bigger deal about the title sponsors. Anyway, that's a side tangent for another day. I honestly felt a little dizzy watching that race tonight. I don't know if I'm just sleep deprived. You know, I did drive like 9 something hours today, but I don't know. I think it was just the racing. I mean, I have never seen anything quite like what I saw tonight. For nearly 2 years now, we've heard about how it's impossible to race 3 wide in this car. I saw 3 wide racing tonight at Atlanta, not Talladega, not Daytona, cramped, confined Atlanta Motor Super Speedway. 3 wide racing, every single straightaway. There were at least a half a dozen drivers somewhere near the front of the field making a move, or at least attempting a pass. And obviously I wasn't behind the wheel, but from my vantage point, it almost looked like guys could make moves on their own. Like runs seemingly came out of nowhere sometimes. Guys like Martin Truex, Eric Jones would rip the fence past 2 guys on the outside, then the very next corner I saw Christopher Bell suddenly had all this momentum on the inside and passed 3 cars back. It was impossible to follow everything. This is a race that honestly I did wish I was sitting in the grandstands for, sitting high above, because kudos to NBC, USA Network, they cover this race about as well as you could, but there was no possible way they could get a camera on every single move that was made out there tonight. So those of you who are at the racetrack, this isn't always the case, but if you were at the track tonight, you truly had the best view of the action, the best seat in the house. You know, Dale Earnhardt Jr., he said something like this during the broadcast, but then he tweeted during the show tonight, Atlanta, hottest ticket on the NASCAR circuit? Hot Atlanta, baby. Does Dale Jr. have a point? Maybe. Just crazy racing tonight. The end of stage 1 with Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, others going back and forth. Stage 2, you had Penske versus Roush, battle for Ford dominance. Austin Cindric getting pushed by Ryan Blaney, Brad Keselowski getting pushed by Chris Buschard, battling against his old team, his old car, in a car he now owns. RFK actually won that battle of the Fords. Buschard and Keselowski got to the lead eventually, but not after some significant back and forth. You had, Keselowski and Buschard, and then Cindric and Blaney, like they got off seat, like they somehow mixed up with each other. Like, it was, again, dizzying at times to watch the race tonight. Ford was fast. We knew coming in Ford would be good. Ford has been off pretty much all year, but the one style of racing they still excel at is the drafting tracks, the super speedways. Daytona, it was 2 Fords, Almirola, Joey Logano, that swept the dual races. In the Daytona 500, Brad Keselowski in a Ford led the most laps. In the first Atlanta race, it was Joey Logano, a Ford, leading the most laps, getting the win over another Ford, Brad Keselowski. At Talladega recently, sure, it was a Chevy, Kyle Busch, who got the win, but it was a Ford and Ryan Blaney who led the most laps. Qualifying yesterday, 8 of the top 10 fastest cars were Fords. Ford. Spoiler alert, a Ford did not win this race. But it was fun seeing some different faces leading laps, like Brad, like Buschard, like Cindric. Just incredible racing tonight. It kind of reminded me of what Daytona looked like before the most recent repave, where it was a little bumpy out there. You couldn't always stay flat out. Handling would come into play. You sometimes had to lift a little, catch the car, feel things out. That's what Atlanta looked like tonight. Did Atlanta just become the best super speedway on the NASCAR schedule? I think we can have that discussion. But now let's talk about the actual results of this race. There are some major playoff implications I want to get to in a moment. Part of why the racing was so thrilling, I think we can all admit, was due to the threat of weather. I actually drove through the storm system that unfortunately flooded Atlanta, or is actively bombarding Atlanta Motor Speedway as I speak. I was driving down from Tennessee through Georgia, partially Alabama into Mississippi. It may not be the exact same system, but the timing, I don't know, I'd have to go look at like an hour-by-hour radar. I'm pretty sure it was the same system. And yeah, it was pelting my car for a bit. The rain was coming in sideways, head on. What am I trying to say? Let me get back on track. The point I'm trying to make is that the rain, or at least the threat of rain, was at least partially responsible for the all-time great, action-packed super speedway racing we saw tonight. Early on, there were fast cars starting near the back of the pack, like Bubba Wallace, Alex Bowman, Christopher Bell, who had an issue in like secondary inspection today. Not sure what that was about. Fast drivers, fast cars who knew they needed to get to the front early, knowing that this race may not go far past halfway. So that jostled things up early. And then once we got to lap 130, once we got past halfway, oh my gosh, I still can't believe there were no huge wrecks tonight. Racing was off the rails the final, I don't know, 30, 40 laps, green flag laps. But rain was good because it forced drivers to be more aggressive early on. The rain was bad, however, because I'm sitting here talking to you about an hour earlier than I originally intended. The trade-off is that the rain also ended tonight's race early and somewhat anticlimactically. William Byron is your winner tonight. We will get to him in just a moment, but first, let's talk about how the end of this race played out, because I empathize with every frustrated fan I saw on social media, those of you watching at home, some of you in the grandstands who aren't necessarily disappointed that this race ended early. I think everyone could see the big storm. No reason to wait here until midnight to get this thing restarted or come back tomorrow. We're well past halfway. I don't think anyone's mad that this race ended early. Some folks are upset with how NASCAR called the final, 15 or so minutes. They ran a lot of pace laps waiting for the heavier showers to finally roll in. NASCAR absolutely could have opened pit road, let the leaders decide, hey, do you think the rain's a few minutes out? Should we pit? A few of the front runners were short on fuel, like Michael McDowell. Let the leaders decide. They could have restarted and probably run 5 to 10 laps before the real showers moved in. They could have. They absolutely could have. But I don't know. I'm not going to crucify NASCAR for the way they called this race, because I remember Daytona 1 year ago, last summer, when NASCAR was pushing it. They tried to get every ounce of green flag racing out of that event that they could, and it bit them. A sudden pop-up shower moved in over turn 1 and wrecked almost the entire field. Rightfully so, all the fans, drivers, competitors criticized NASCAR for how they called that event. I think it's at least somewhat hypocritical for us to then now criticize how they handled Atlanta. Pack racing and rain do not mix. I think it's fair for NASCAR to be conservative in this case. Sure, they could have run 5 or 6, 7 laps, but if that heavier shower pops up, a little earlier than it did, they were surrounded by green and yellow on the radar. If it pops up a little earlier than it did, you risk wrecking 20 or 30 cars and becoming a joke. Learn from your past mistakes. I think NASCAR did in this case. And while the finish was extremely anticlimactic, I think NASCAR made the right call, personally. It was a tough spot. If you could go back in time, sure, I'd love for them to have run, 3 or 4 laps, get in before the heavy stuff comes down, and decide the winner that way. But, hindsight is hindsight for a reason. It doesn't work that way in real time. It's disappointing. It's a little deflating, if you're not a William Byron fan at least, but I think NASCAR made the right call considering the information they had to work with. Now let's take a look at the results. William Byron takes over the series lead with his 4th win of the year, his 2nd Atlanta win. He won the first super speedway race here at the beginning of last season. Byron had an eventful race. He had an issue on pit road early on. Then he actually got spun by Corey LaJoie down the front stretch, but avoided any significant damage, worked his way back through the field, played the strategy right, timed out the weather. Wasn't the fastest car tonight, but he got lucky. Did well in the final restart. Everyone was dealt the same hand tonight. It's not like what happened at Chicago last weekend where NASCAR arbitrarily changed the rules midway through. From lap 130 to the end, every driver raced every lap as if it was the final lap, and this is just how things shook out. Congrats to William Byron, but there's not much we can really take from this race, quite honestly. It wasn't the best car. I mean, kind of got lucky. Let's just be real. I must admit, it would have been cool to see Suarez or Allmendinger or McDowell get a win to completely flip the playoff grid upside down, although we'll look at that in a moment. They still did some damage tonight. Brad Keselowski and his crew chief Matt McCall faced an impossible decision in the closing laps. He chose to pit, take 4 tires, get fuel. They were running low. I'd have to look at exactly how many laps were run under green to know if that was the right call. He drove his way back up there to 6, but if he'd stayed out, did they have enough fuel to get to that final caution right around under yellow before the red? I think it would have been very close. I think they probably made the right call. They just needed this race to stay green, maybe 3 or 4 more laps, and Brad was coming with a full head of steam. He was in the mix. Anything could have happened. Brad Keselowski, to me, was the star of the show tonight. I got to give a shout out to JJ Yaley though, finishing 7th. He was right there in the mix as well at the end. Great job, great work. Justin Haley, controversial move at the end of last night's race, choosing not to work with his teammate Daniel Hemrick. He said afterwards that he felt the car sputter. He was just pulling out of line. I don't know if that's true. Haley was in the mix again tonight. You see 2 Colleague cars finishing in the top 10. Hopefully that eases the sting of losing last night's race a little bit. Good run tonight for Justin Haley. And Ryan Blaney, I think maybe the other star of the show. I think Keselowski won stage 2, Blaney won stage 1. He still gets a really solid top 10 finish. He was my pick to win, and I was feeling pretty good about it until, like Brad, Blaney was forced to make the difficult decision to pit. But those are your top finishers from Atlanta tonight. Now I want to flip things over and look at the playoff bubble with now just 7 races until the playoffs begin. Bubba Wallace and Ty Gibbs entered the evening in, they exit out. Suarez and McDowell with top 5 finishes played the rain perfectly. They're now in, albeit by fairly slim margins. Ty Gibbs got caught up in a crash. Eric Jones was off the bottom a bit, but then LaJoie came down, spun out, collected Ty Gibbs. I think completely destroyed the left front. I don't know where Gibbs finished. I think it might have been last. That was 34th. Okay, 34th. Yeah, that killed Ty Gibbs and points. And Bubba Wallace winds up 25th after getting tagged by Ricky Stenhouse Jr. There's kind of a weird stack up in the top lane. Bubba got sent spinning. Tough break for him. Another bubble driver who needed a bounce back night tonight and didn't get it was Alex Bowman, who got wrecked by Denny Hamlin at Chicago last week, finished last. This week, it was Alex Bowman wrecking Denny Hamlin. Roles reversed. Bowman wound up 26th after that whole deal. But there you can see the points. Allmendinger, also with a good finish, eats into that deficit quite a bit. Bubba Wallace still right there, but boy, we looked at Atlanta as a great chance for Bubba to make up points, to gain on the cut line. How great a super speedway racer he is. And one thing led to another. That did not happen tonight. That's a pretty big setback for the 23 team. Keselowski up there extends his points cushion, and we avoid an upset winner, so the RFK guy is still feeling pretty good, being a full 3 and 4 slots ahead of the cut line. But those are what the points look like with 7 races to go before the playoffs begin. I talked about a few of the main incidents. Did I miss any other big ones? I mean, I mentioned LaJoie got into Byron. Eric Jones felt like every time I looked up, he was either squeezing someone or getting squeezed into the wall. I mentioned he and LaJoie got together. Not sure. Yeah, it was kind of on both of them a little bit. Oh, Kevin Harvick wound up 30th tonight. Spun out late. I think he got spun by, was it Hamlin, if I remember, who kind of came down off the wall a little bit? I don't remember now for sure, but Harvick went spinning, no caution. But that's not the point of Harvick's night. Harvick, pre-race, driving next to his 2001 Chevy that won at Atlanta. It was Harvick's first career Cup win. It was just a few weeks after Dale Earnhardt's tragic death. It was an emotional day for Harvick, for Richard Childress, for the entire NASCAR community when he won that race in that car. So to see that same car on track, now driven by Richard Childress, next to a much older, a much more experienced, a much more accomplished Kevin Harvick, that was moving. You can even kind of hear it in Harvick's voice during the little pre-race or the radio interview he did before the race began. Like, that was a cool visual. That 29 car still looked clean as ever. I mean, that was awesome. Something about seeing these old, iconic NASCAR cars on track in the modern day. I remember being at Daytona, or no, I'm sorry, Talladega a few years ago when, it might have been Richard Childress again, brought Dale Earnhardt's final, I think it was his 2000, his final Cup win, his 76th win, the Talladega, when he brought that car out for the opening pace laps, and just seeing that old piece of history up against a modern NASCAR track with modern NASCAR cars grumbling behind it. Like, I love seeing restored iconic race cars on modern NASCAR tracks. Like, that's just like, it's an easy nostalgia trip. It's beautiful. So that was a great moment. Results be damned, Kevin Harvick stole the show tonight with those opening pace laps and the gesture Richard Childress made. But that's going to do it for the results. I don't think there's much else to touch on. I guess let's put this race on the groovy gauge. Man, this is a tough one to score. If the racing had stayed that action-packed all night and they'd made it to the finish, this might get a perfect score. But the rain, oh, gotta put a damper on everything, literally and figuratively. I'm gonna give this race, deep breath, long pause, dramatic effect, a 90. Gonna go 90%. I gave Chicago last week a 91. It was a better race than Chicago by a little bit, I think. More action-packed, more edge of your seat, more thrilling from start to finish. but Chicago had that beautiful, iconic, memorable ending, thrilling finish with a deserving driver going to victory lane. Tonight's race had a wet fart of a finish with, let's just be honest, a fluke going to victory lane. Not a fluke in that he's like never won before. Obviously, William Byron's a great driver. He's going to win a lot more races. He's even won at Atlanta before, but he wasn't the best driver tonight. He got lucky tonight. That's what I'm trying to say. I just got to cover my butt because you fans, credit to you. You're very passionate. You keep me in check. If I say anything a little out of line, y'all let me know in the comments. I appreciate that. But 90%, I think that's fair. Stinks. Could have been a perfect score. Great super speedway racing tonight. I don't have much else to say. Good stuff. That's gonna do it for me, I believe. Let me know what you thought of tonight's race down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, helps me out a ton. If you're new and you love NASCAR, hit that subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of the latest videos from my channel. And thank you to my Patreon supporters for your very generous support. I'll be back home tomorrow, so you will see me again very soon. I'll be back in the studio this week. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, folks. Stay dry out there in Atlanta.